Good evening, everyone. I'm meteorologist Dave Snider with the National Weather Service. Thanks for watching Alaska Weather with us tonight, this January the 29th. As always, we encourage you to stay up to date with your local weather information, and you can do that a lot of different ways from the National Weather Service. You can call us at the Alaska Weather Information Line, 1-800-472-0391. Find us on our website, weather.gov/Alaska. And this is a great page to start and bookmark. You can go from this page to the Alaska Pacific River Forecast Center, the Alaska Aviation Weather Unit, any of your local weather forecast offices in Fairbanks and Juneau or here in Anchorage. And once you get a click on that map, that'll take you to that local forecast. You can bookmark that as well, and you can get there a whole lot faster. Now, if you haven't tried this yet, go to mobile.weather.gov. Put that on your smartphone or your tablet or even your cell phone, and simply type that in, type in your location, and then save that site, that results from your search, to your home screen. And it's a really mobile-friendly way to access the National Weather Service forecast. It is not an app, but it is a fast-loading website that works really well in low bandwidth situations there. So if you got kind of a sketchy signal, or maybe everybody's using the same tower there that you are in your village, this is a great way to manage that. It works well on saving some of that internet costs as well. If you can't find what you're looking for, email me, david.snider@noaa.gov, and I'm happy to serve you any way I possibly can. Let's take a look at what's going on across the region. We're going to work north to south today. The worst weather is up around Kaktovik in the eastern Beaufort Seacoast, and until noon on Thursday, a blizzard warning is in effect. That means poor visibility, it's driving wind, and in this case, it also means a wind chill, a factor probably down around 50 below for what it'll feel like, with more of a northwesterly flow up to about 40-50 miles per hour. And a little bit further west of that, a winter weather advisory for poor visibility thanks to the wind. That's coming in a little bit more from the north around the Prudhoe Bay, Dead Horse area. So for the central Beaufort Seacoast, a winter weather advisory there until about noon on Thursday as well. In both cases, though, the wind chill factor could be about 50 below. So not only is it going to be dangerously cold, visibility may be impacted, but you're probably going to get some snow, and it looks like at least a couple inches will be possible in that area. So be prepared for kind of a nasty go from tonight, all the way into at least the first half of your Thursday there before we expect any improvements. With a pretty serious high pressure system, there is going to be a lot of wind working its way through the Alcan border and across the North Slope, especially the eastern half. As we get into the Brooks Range and into the Yukon Flats region, we're also looking at some wind. Now, there may be some additional snow accumulation, but really wind is going to be the big factor here. So winter weather advisories for poor visibility are possible in this region. Now, as we move further south, there has been snow falling across the Tanana Valley and up into the upper Tanana Valley for sure. But as you get into areas around Denali and the Parks Highway and then eastward, we're talking about another round of snow over some of the higher terrain plus wind. And so south of Denali and toward, let's see, Trim's Camp, I guess, we're also looking at about 4 to 10 inches of snow. So watch for dangerous wind chills in that area. Poor visibility when it's snowing, of course. And again, just be extra careful there and do a plan for some wind. That will last at least until tonight and probably in some cases till tomorrow morning. So winter weather advisories for many of the areas you see in yellow, blizzard warning for the eastern Beaufort Seacoast. Here's our big weather picture here from the satellite's perspective, and you can see one wave after another wave after another wave lining up and moving toward the North Gulf Coast and into southeast. Plenty of rain across the Panhandle today. Looks like some higher terrain snow, but certainly plenty of rain for places where most people live. We've seen the transition taking shape here across South Central. Most areas south of Anchorage and Kenai have been looking at rainfall on and off throughout today. That difference between rain and snow is slowly working its way northward and trying to make it into Anchorage, even though about the same time, it looked like Kenai was still hanging on to some snow by mid-afternoon. Up north, it is snowing around the Tanana Valley, as I mentioned, all the way across the Alcan border, and you can see this bright white area here in the cloud cover. That is an active area of snow underneath all the cloud cover. And then we've got a lot of high pressure up across the north and western slope that is just pushing a ton of cold air further and further south. And so you see a pretty remarkable edge in that satellite pattern there where that drier air is moving southward. That's all being pushed up against low pressure, working some warm and wet air into the Bering Sea. And you can see this boundary lifting northward and being pulled quickly westward as those offshore winds are literally shooting those clouds way out to sea and being drawn into a deepening area of low pressure here across the North Pacific. So just a fascinating area of weather to watch today right in our own state. Of course, it's a big place, but there's a whole lot going on and a lot of big weather taking shape. Now, this high pressure system that we've been watching is also part of that same pattern that's pushing a tremendous amount of cold toward the lower 48. So the Midwesterners are getting a taste of Alaska and the Arctic as we move through this week, and we hope it treats them well. But as we look closer to home, the cold air is working its way north and east. It's wringing out moisture as it's running into the higher train of southeast this afternoon. As that's working around Prince William Sound, the north and western side is cold enough for snow. It's been snowing in the Susitna Valley and around Prince William Sound. As that warmer air lifts northward, though, we're getting some rain mixing in with that from south to north. A look further west shows a frontal boundary draped across the southern Bering Sea. This is where that cloud cover is stretching into the north and western side very quickly. Low pressure here out around the western chain is deepening from 969. And as we get into tonight, that little piece right there goes up to 983. But the entire weather picture here back to the west is still deepening and strengthening as we go. Low pressure across the northern Gulf at 998 millibars. This front that was cold is now starting to fall apart into more of just an area of low pressure. That will keep precipitation going across the north and eastern coast. Across the west, periods of snow are expected across the Yukon and Kuskokwim deltas and into Bristol Bay. And as we noticed, that a lot of clear air here across the north and west. VFR flying, as you'll see here in just a little bit. But the turbulence could be an issue. Low-level visibility could be an issue because of blowing snow, and it is going to be cold. So just because there's nothing really painted on the map there, be mindful of those crossed arrows. That means blowing snow and visibility restrictions could be possible. Blizzard conditions may continue across the eastern Beaufort Seacoast tonight, and that main threat for accumulating snow will gradually shift eastward, but we still have a healthy north and westerly push onto the north coast. So if you're up there watching in Prudhoe Bay and Deadhorse, conditions may not improve a whole lot more until we get into about midday Thursday when that winter weather advisory may be lifted. As you look in southeast, warm and wet air is moving in. Not much of a wind with this right now, but what you should be mindful of is as we get into Thursday and Friday, we do have a pretty stout pressure gradient moving southward. This cold air is coming your way. It is going to get a lot colder in southeast, and we're going to add some wind to that. So as you get into Thursday, Friday, and Saturday, if you know wind is a big issue for you in the Lynn Canal and the Chatham Strait, especially up areas north toward Skagway, Haines, and up toward Juneau, and Gustavus even, you should start thinking about some wind impacts because it does look like there is going to be a pretty healthy opportunity for some long-lived windy conditions and gusty conditions at that as we move toward Thursday, Friday, and into the weekend. Low pressure is going to hover here around Prince William Sound, and that's just going to keep a sloppy mess around south central. Kenai Peninsula locations all the way up into the Susitna and the Mat-Su Valleys, Prince William Sound, and the northern Gulf Coast. To the west, it's going to be colder. Areas of light snow will be possible from, let's say, Kipnik all the way out toward Macoriac and up toward Lake Iliamna and the western side of the Alaska Range out towards Sparivon. All these regions are going to be dealing with at least some lingering snow and some increasing areas of cold. Out to the west, low pressure continues to deepen there at about 947 and then finally pushes north and east. It's just barely on the map here. You can see the center of low pressure right along the coast of the Kamchatka Peninsula. But as the front moves toward the Pribilovs, it is going to bring in a healthy amount of warmer air, and that means snow falling around the Pribilovs and the central and northern Bering Sea may start to mix in with some rain there as that takes shape. High pressure is still lurking just north and west of Wainwright and Utqiagvik at 1,040 millibars, still pushing colder air south and east and driving it west, helping to clear the sky but keeping it cold. And here's that tight pressure gradient shaping up around the Lynn Canal and driving its way through southeastern Alaska. It really looks like at the end of the week, this is where the weather focus for Alaska is going to be. Here's a quick check of temperatures tonight and into tomorrow. Mid to upper 30s for southeast, fairly mild so far. South central, southwest in the upper 20s and lower 30s. North of the Alaska Range, sub-zero for most locations. 0 to about 15 below around Arctic Village and Anaktuvik Pass. Up north, colder still, 15 to 25 below. Southwestern temps in the teens and 20s and at or above freezing for southwest. High temperatures cooling down in the north as we go toward Wednesday afternoon, anywhere from 15 to 20 below.
And now, aviation weather around Alaska.
Moving on to your aviation weather now, widespread IFR is expected across the northern and eastern Gulf as wave after wave after wave moves out and away from low pressure centered up across south central, and is all part of this upper level weather pattern that's bringing a lot of warm and wet air into the interior and along the west coast and eventually into the Bering Sea. You can see IFR spreading out over the Aleutians, the Pribilovs, and just about to St. Matthew. North of that, the low visibility and ceiling does improve substantially. You're looking up towards St. Lawrence Island, the Bering Strait, and the Chukchi Coast, and really along most of the Yukon Valley. Things should be VFR as we start your Wednesday morning. Not a whole lot of change, though, is expected through Wednesday afternoon as a wave continues to work into south central, the Wrangell St. Elias region, all the way down into southeast. Broad areas of IFR should be expected throughout the day. We may see some improvement around Kodiak Island. Southwestern Alaska typically looks to be MVFR through most of the day, though some areas south and west of the higher terrain there around Cape Newenham and down toward Bristol Bay will still remain IFR. The Alaska Peninsula, the chain for the most part, all looking at IFR conditions throughout the day, and you can see MVFR stretching in from Kaktovik west to about Prudhoe Bay and Deadhorse and into Anaktuvik and Adigan Pass. South of that, things will remain VFR all the way through the interior and a large part of the Yukon Delta, Norton Sound, and Kotzebue Sound, including the Seward Peninsula, Nome, and St. Lawrence Island. Even Little Diomede looking pretty good for your Thursday morning. MVFR conditions there for the upper Yukon Valley. For parts of southeast, we expect to see broad areas of IFR continuing, though the heavy visibility and ceiling restrictions across south central and the Copper River Valley should be lifted as we get into Thursday morning. Look for improvements in Prince William Sound, down Cook Inlet, all the way toward Kodiak Island. And then once again, we're still looking at least some marginal restrictions for Bristol Bay and through the Kuskokwim Delta, with a little bit of IFR lingering around a front across the central and western chain. For Thursday afternoon, that front's on the move. You can see the IFR spreading eastward into Bristol Bay and over the Alaska Peninsula up to about Sand Point. And as you get into Prince William Sound, or just outside, I should say, IFR conditions are expected there, but most of south central, southwest, the interior, north and western Alaska, and really a large part of the eastern interior should be generally VFR. IFR concerns are going to linger across northern and central parts of southeast, though, and southern southeast will at least see some improvement toward marginal conditions. Here's your pass conditions now. For Anaktuvik and Adigan Pass, we expect to see marginal levels lingering through all of your Wednesday. Lake Clark and Merrill Pass, as you saw, will hold at IFR through all day long, probably Wednesday afternoon, maybe seeing a few breaks there. Rainy Pass, marginal conditions. Windy Pass, marginal. We expect to see a little improvement in Isabel, maybe as much as VFR by the afternoon. Metasta, probably holding at marginal levels most of your Wednesday. Tanita Pass, we expect to see this leaning over toward IFR as the day goes on, as another wave is passing through. Portage Pass will hold at IFR conditions, and Chilkoot and White Pass all day long on Wednesday, IFR. The surface freezing lines show that warm and wet air is banked into southeast. That's part of the reason for the visibility restrictions that you'll see. The surface freezing line is holding out across a large part of the northern Gulf and right just south of Bristol Bay and then very close to St. Paul. Out to the west, the next wave is already pushing in some warm and wet air closer to the western chain. Icing potential is limited to about 2,000 feet and above, and it's pretty spotty up north right now around Anaktuvik and Adigan Pass. South of that, and generally south of the Alaska Range, we're running into levels that are about 4,000 to 5,000 feet and higher, and most of this is isolated moderate. The greatest risk right now would probably be across the north and eastern Gulf, where we have a considerably higher moisture content there. In some cases, that might reach into the considerable moderate stage, but only on a very isolated basis. The jet stream right now is doing what we call kind of a Rex block. It almost makes the letter R a little bit here. It's also kind of a breakaway pattern from that Omega pattern that we talk about sometimes, which is a little bit more of an upside down shaped U, like the Greek letter Omega. As you can see, a broad trough sits right across western Alaska, but cutting into the top of that is that ridge of high pressure. This is what's controlling that big cold that's making the news across the lower 48, but it's shunting that off to the east and not allowing that to build into eastern Alaska right now for the most part. Very fast wind speeds, though, moving through the Bering and across the Gulf of Alaska. You can see a broad westerly flow sweeping into southeast, slowing down as it reaches southeastern Alaska. Offshore winds for north and western Alaska. The interior looking at winds around 20 to 25 knots as several waves of low pressure kind of encompass the region. Low pressure here is also seen at 3,000 feet. There's that controlling ridge of high pressure out across the Chukchi Sea. Northerly onshore flow for the North Slope, and westerlies moving across the Gulf with an offshore flow for the Yukon Delta, running around 15 to about 25 knots. So turbulence right where you would expect it. Below 4,000 feet, considerable moderate, fairly widespread for west and west interior parts of Alaska, and below 4,000 feet for the chain. Hello again, I'm meteorologist Dave Snider with the National Weather Service for another edition of Alaska Weather Facts. And joining us again, talking about the augmented reality sandbox, is Eric Stevens from GINA, the Geographic Information Network of Alaska. And he's actually talking about a project from AKwx, which is the experimental program to stimulate competitive research. A lot of acronyms, but some really fun stuff today, right, Eric?
You bet. We've got a learning tool that is a tool that's fun to use, and it really has a relevance to actually daily lives of anyone who goes outside and sees lumpy topography in Alaska. We've got a lot of mountains and such. You know, when I was younger and go on your first hike in the hills, say, you're given, maybe you're in the Boy Scouts or you get at the kiosk at the trailhead, a topographic map, a flat piece of paper with all these lines on it, bullseyes, long lines that curve back on themselves, say, perhaps things that look like this. A quadrangle or a topographic map. We've got here just to illustrate a couple of examples near Denali. Alaska has so much topography, so many mountains. And what are all these lines that we see? It can be tough to know what this means the first time you look at it. What we've got, all these lines represent lines of where the elevation of the topography goes through a certain level above sea level, say that this line represents where the mountains have gone from below 1,000 feet, mean sea level, up through 1,000 feet and above. That's your 1,000-foot contour. And when the mountain keeps going up, you're up to 1,200 feet, 1,400 feet, and so on. And that's how you get this little bullseye around the peak of a mountain.
Kind of makes layered slices, right?
Kind of like layered slices. Nice way to look at that. And when you see the lines are closer together, you're going up more steeply. If the mountain rises more slowly, it takes you longer in horizontal space to go through those different vertical increments. So
that is really hard to visualize.
Right. Imagine you're looking at a 2D piece of paper, two-dimensional piece of paper, but you're trying to understand what the three-dimensional world looks like. Well, enter the augmented reality sandbox. Yes, what is that? It is right here. We have the sandbox with us today, Sandbox 2.0, portable version. Built up at University of Alaska Fairbanks. And we've got a couple of folks helping out today.
Let's see, Alana Valaji, and she's a mechanical engineering student from the University of Alaska Fairbanks. If you want to give us a thumbs up there, Alana, thanks for helping us out today. And Courtney Breest, she's the outreach coordinator from AKwx, also helping us out today. Thanks, Courtney.
And this tool here has a Microsoft Kinect to sense the level of sand in this sandbox. And then the Kinect feeds its information into a computer that then sends a signal to a projector to draw the appropriate topographic lines on this topography. The fun thing about this, as we can see here, is that the sandbox and its Kinect and its projector, they all work as a team. So here we've got a mountain in the middle of the sandbox. What if we took down the mountain to some degree? Watch as the software responds and redraws the topography.
Kind of a caldera forming there.
There you go, And what's fun about the sandbox too is it knows that gravity flows downhill, and we've got some water that's actually down in the lowest elevations. And what's happening now is we're making it rain a little bit. We'll fill up rain into that elevated lake bed, that caldera, as you said. And so now water is pooled up there. And what if you gouged out an outlet channel?
Glacial dam release.
There you go. The water flows out. What we're seeing here is a tool that allows people to touch and connect, Microsoft Connect, RRR, to connect two-dimensional topographic maps like what we have here, these flat things on a piece of paper, to the real three-dimensional world. I think this sandbox's real particular application as a learning tool to young people is, what does a two-dimensional map mean when it's trying to represent the three-dimensional world? This sandbox is kind of both at once. It's actually three-dimensional, lumpy topography there, the sand, but it's got these lines drawn on the three-dimensional sand that would be on a two-dimensional piece of paper.
Wow, that is a huge leap from the learning that we experienced when we were younger to how children and even adults are visualizing in these new forms of technology. Allows that to kind of reshape their thinking and visualize this in a very useful and absolutely hands-on way. It's amazing.
It's a hands-on tool, and
it's hard for me to sit here and not go play with that.
Well, that's what happened at GINA up at the University of Alaska in Fairbanks when the first model was being made, the prototype with plywood and such. We had professional adult professor types had heard about this, and they came by because they wanted to see how it worked.
Okay.
And everyone becomes that idealistic, wonder-filled youngster.
Sure.
And you just can't help but play with that, and to see how it reacts in time, and
Right.
it's a dynamic learning tool, and it
Dynamic,
responds.
That's exactly the word.
And
Yeah.
you wonder what applicabilities beyond a teaching
Right.
tool for
Where does it
topography
go?
can it have? You can see how in Alaska we have inundation mapping is an issue. If you had water slosh inland, say in a coastal flooding event on the western coast of Alaska or the Arctic coast, you could see this. The concept is illustrated here as an introductory learning method. I think this is a potentially good outreach tool for all of us in Alaska.
Okay, so not only just a topographical sense, a mapping sense, maybe something that leads into understanding of how geographic information systems work with GIS, but also geology, if we wanted to get into kind of the formations and the bigger land masses and the representation of the 2D map. We could go into hydrology, which is very important in Alaska, of course. And even just understanding the weather sense. Mounding up a big pile of sand could be that Arctic high pressure system sitting on top of Fairbanks, and the voids would be low pressure systems. This can go a lot of different directions.
Yes, exactly. It's not just landforms, but pressure has contours of high pressure and low pressure. And I wish I had this kind of a learning tool when I was taking Meteorology 101 back 25 years ago.
Wow.
It would have been helpful, I think.
Probably would have gotten a better grade, yeah. Okay, thank you so much for coming by, Eric, and Alana and Courtney, thank you so much for your help there in the sandbox. We are going to play in the sandbox a little bit more coming up tomorrow on our next edition of Alaska Weather Facts. We hope you join us for that. In the meantime, make sure you go to alaska.edu/EPSCOR. That's alaska.edu EPSCOR to learn more information about what we're doing with this augmented reality sandbox around Alaska. We'll see you next time on Alaska Weather Facts.
And now, marine weather around Alaska.
And back with a sea ice update now. A substantial amount of east to westerly movement has been occurring thanks to the stronger winds we've been seeing, especially north of Nunivak Island. You can see areas of blue here around the Yukon Delta, inside of Norton Sound, along the south coast of the Seward Peninsula and up the western end. Towards St. Lawrence Island, not a whole lot of changes there, but along St. Matthew and along the southern ice edge all the way into the Kuskokwim Delta, all of these areas are at very least marginal. In many cases across the west coast, there's open water there, as many of you have noticed and reported, and we certainly do appreciate those reports and pictures. It helps us a lot so we can communicate that out to everyone else. So keep sending those pictures. For the very latest analysis, head to weather.gov/Anchorage/ice with the discussion there as well. But do expect more motion from east to west and probably continued erosion along this southern ice edge, including areas around St. Matthew. As we get into southeast, the winds are going to be strengthening the next several days. Look for a southeast flow 15 to 20 in the inside passage, more of an onshore flow right now, following the front as it moves in on Wednesday afternoon. Continued rain there as well. 15 to 20 knots on the inside, but watch this come in stronger from the north as we get into Thursday, and it's going to be rather gusty as well, so watch for some wind headlines. 20 to 40 knots, anywhere from 4 to 8 foot seas in the north, not quite so bad as down to the south. Offshore wind blowing out of Cross Sound and Gustavus there, 15 knots with an 11-foot sea, gust to 35 outside of Yakutat, and probably talking about some pretty gusty conditions up here outside of the Copper River Delta as well. Winds not so bad on Wednesday for South Central, light on the inside of Prince William Sound, 10 knots, 2-foot seas there. Northerlies coming down over Cook Inlet. Notice that there are some areas of open water now. Westerlies across the Barrens, 20 knots with a 5 to 6-foot sea, and then strengthening wind as we get into Thursday. The worst of it will be to the east. Look for north and northeasterlies coming down Cook Inlet, strengthening over the Barrens to 30 knots with 8-foot seas, and northerlies out of many of the gaps around Prince William Sound in the Copper River Basin. Watch for 25 to 30 knot winds with about 7-foot seas inside and outside. Most of the wind around the Alaska Peninsula will stay off to your west and south as we get into Wednesday, but watch for winds to pick up in the next several days as well. Westerlies over the Kodiak Island region, 15 knots inside Shelikof Strait, 8-foot seas on the east side though. North and easterlies coming down the Bering Sea coast, 10 knots with 1 to 4-foot seas. As we get into Thursday, you can see the wind strengthening just to the west, and that'll just kind of clip areas around Sandpoint, Cold Bay, and False Pass. 25 knots there with 5-foot seas in the Bering side, 12-foot seas on the south side, and hanging on to a strengthening northwesterly flow around Kodiak Island down toward Perryville. 25 knots on either side, 5 to 8 foot seas for Kodiak, 10-foot seas as you move down the coast. Into the Aleutians we go now. Look for a south and easterly flow moving into that strong and strengthening area of low pressure that's just kind of hovering in the North Pacific and near the Kamchatka Peninsula. Everywhere else will be drawn into the area of low pressure off to the east in the Gulf. 25 to 30 knots here with 6 to 9 foot seas on the Bering Sea coast side and 17 to 22 foot seas there on the Pacific coast side with that west and southerly flow on Wednesday. And then the western low pressure system starts to take command of the weather picture here. A south and southeasterly wind builds 35 to 45 knots for the central and eastern chain. 9-foot seas there north of Unalaska and Nikolsky to 22-foot seas south of Adak and Atka. Look for seas to build to 28 feet from Kiska to Shemya on that southerly wind to 45 knots. Across the west coast, remember some open areas of water here, but don't look for a whole lot of strength on a lot of that ice right now, as some of that could be in motion and is moving away from the coast in many cases. North and easterly flow 20 to 30 knots, 20 knots around St. Matthew with a 10-foot sea, 6-foot seas around St. Paul and St. George on a 15-knot wind from the north and east. Look for winds to build again with that strengthening area of low pressure in the west. This is all going to pick up 20 to 25 over the ice, 35 to 40 knots from St. George to St. Paul and St. Matthew. 10 to 13-foot seas expected there, and watch for areas of heavy freezing spray. North and westerly winds across the Beaufort Seacoast. Remember, blizzard warning for the eastern coast, including Kaktovik, winter weather advisories, poor visibility, snow, and wind chill factors of 50 below for the entire region, thanks to that north and westerly wind. Northeasterlies coming down through the Chukchi, anywhere from 15 to 30 knots all the way into the Bering Strait. Winds diminish a little bit around Utqiagvik, but south of that, they stay up around 20 to 25. Westerlies over the Beaufort Seacoast will continue on Thursday, 15 to 25 knots. Recapping tonight's weather, wind and snow for the north coast. We're blowing snow and about 4 to 10 inches for the eastern Alaska Range back toward Denali, south of the park. You can expect some tricky driving conditions probably, thanks to poor visibility and blowing snow and falling snow at that. Rain continues in southeast, but we set the stage for cold air to move southward into the northern parts of southeast as we head toward Thursday. So literally batten down the hatches.
These forecasts are for planning purposes only. Call 1-800-WX-BRIEF for a formal pre-flight briefing. Always file a flight plan before you go flying. The U.S. Coast Guard Auxiliary urges you to leave a float plan with a friend or the harbor master before you go boating.